Welcome back in, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today, I am joined by Representative Chad Perkins of Dover Foxcroft. Chad, thank you so much for being here today.
Sir, thank you.
So we are here to talk about question 1 and question 2 on the main ballot. We'll get right into it, and we'll start off with reading question 1. So question 1 is as, quote, do you want to change Maine election laws to eliminate 2 days of absentee voting, prohibit requests for absentee ballots by phone or family members, and ongoing absentee voter status for seniors and people with disabilities, ban prepaid postage on absentee ballot return envelopes, limit the number of drop boxes, require voters to show certain photo ID before voting, and make other changes to our elections. Now, Representative Perkins, where do you stand on this issue?
So I'm in strong support of this measure.
In strong support?
Very strong support.
Please.
So we've been hearing for some time that we want secure and fair elections, and I strongly support that. Maine right now is currently one of only 14 states that don't require some sort of ID to vote. And that's what this measure is basically about. It's requiring voter ID. And regardless of the language that the Secretary of State has put on the ballot initiative, all the rest of the additional language outside of the actual requirement to have an ID, all of that is there for is to require that there's some kind of consistency across the board. If you want real security, you can't lock the front door and then leave the back door wide open. So if you're going to have people show an ID when they show up to vote in person, you have to have some kind of ID requirement when they request a ballot by absentee as well. And so all those other additional provisions in there as well are just to make sure that we have that same kind of security and surety in our voting process when we have an absentee ballot as well.
Now, you're talking a lot about security. I have to ask the question, are Maine elections currently secure?
So we don't know, honestly.
We don't know.
I don't think we do know. I mean, the Secretary Bellows has actually, I mean, she was on the podcast with Mark Elias where she said, yes, you know, she said she's sure that there are instances where people that shouldn't be voting are out there voting, but we don't know how widespread that is. It could be a few people, could be a few hundred people. We don't know, because unfortunately, no one's ever actually been able to go in and look and see how widespread that is. I don't think it's as bad as, you know, half the people out there voting shouldn't be voting, but every time that someone votes that shouldn't vote, they're taking away a vote of someone that should be voting. Okay. So if you want a secure election, you want that election to be as secure as possible and ensure that the rights of the people that should be voting are protected.
Okay. Well, a little bit of pushback on that. In 2011, Charlie Summers, the last Republican Secretary of State, he actually put a commissioned a study to look into election security, and that study found there was no widespread fraud in Maine and that elections were secure. Has there been any shift in security since 2011, and what has that shift been? Okay,
it's the same answer. We don't know. 2011 is a long time since, you know, 2025. And because we don't know, and there have been efforts to resist looking into that, I think it's just incumbent upon us to require that we make those elections as secure as possible.
Okay, well, it's been said that about 45% of Mainers vote by absentee, and this is going to change a lot of the ways that people can request those ballots. How do you see that impacting those voters if this does pass?
I don't think it's going to impact them as much as people think it's going to. We see the commercials, and of course, you know, people have an interest on either side to go out and, you know, they're going to campaign either for or against it. And when you see a campaign commercial for anything, you're always going to see worst case scenarios, or they're going to use hyperbole. But when you actually read the question, I don't think it's going to be as bad as people think it is. I mean, someone that wants an absentee ballot still has multiple ways to get that absentee ballot. They can request it by mail. There's going to be an electronic submission just like there is now. Someone that's in a nursing home, they're still going to have that opportunity where the Secretary of State's office is still going to come into the nursing home and have those days where those people are still going to be able to vote. It's not like, you know, this hyperbole where we hear out there that this is going to destroy absentee ballots. It's not going to destroy. All it is going to require that if you're requesting an absentee ballot, that there's just going to be a little more security by requesting that you put a copy of your ID in there, that there's an envelope in there that you're going to sign that says, hey, this is actually me. I'm actually the one casting this ballot.
Okay. Well, we are about halfway through our allotted time, and I want to make sure that we at least get to question 2.
Yes, sir.
So we're going to take a look at question 2 right now. The language on that is, do you want to allow courts to temporarily prohibit a person from having dangerous weapons if law enforcement, family, or household members show that person poses a significant danger, causing physical injury to themselves or others? Representative, where do you stand on this?
I strongly oppose this measure.
Strongly oppose this
measure.
measure,
Strongly oppose this. So currently we have a yellow flag law in the state of Maine, as you know. And unfortunately, our yellow flag law should be the standard for legislation around the country, and it's not. We saw a massive increase in the use of this legislation after the tragedy down in Lewiston. Right now, to date, it's been used over 1,100 times successfully to keep Maynard safe. And more than 950 of those times have been after the Lewiston incident. That's a major increase. And it's working. We see it working. And the best part about the way we do it compared to emergency protective orders in other states is that when we take someone into custody because of the yellow flag procedure, that person is required to get a mental health evaluation. Okay, and that's important because we know there's a link between mental health and people that could be a danger to themselves when using it, or to other people when using a firearm. The proposed legislation through this referendum, there is no mandatory mental health diagnosis or evaluation in that, and that's a problem. That is a needed component, that mental health evaluation. In addition, if you read the Commission's report on the Lewiston incident, they acknowledged that there might be a few things that needed to be tightened up in the yellow flag law, but the yellow flag law at that time could have stopped that. It just wasn't used enough, and we are using it now. And the legislature responded to that in 2024 by making a few slight changes to the yellow flag law. For example, the courts and the district attorneys, said, hey, there's this 2-week period where we have to have this appeal hearing after someone has a yellow flag procedure. We extended that to 30 days. Well, with the new legislation, that 30 days goes back down to 2 weeks. So that's going to put that same burden back on the courts, back on the DAs that was there prior to us changing that. So we're almost going backwards in that. And so I think yellow flag law is working. I think we need to stay with that. And we need to keep that mental health component in there. I think that's vital.
One thing I would like to touch on within the bill, there is a caveat that the respondent can request an early termination of the extreme risk order that is posed under this law. If someone has abused the law or if there is a burden on the court, do you think that that caveat goes far enough to protect people's Second Amendment rights?
I don't think it does. I don't think it does, especially when we know, just as because of that change we had to make in 2024 to the yellow flag law, the courts are so overburdened right now. I think even if someone says, hey, this was abuse, this was a spite report or something else, even if they request that, I don't think you're going to see a timely response to that, and I think people's rights are going to be trampled on. And that was one of the big things that we pushed for when we passed yellow flag law, was to make sure that someone's constitutionally protected Second Amendment right was protected. And that's the benefit of the yellow flag law. We have that public safety component, we have that constitutional right component, and it's working very well.
We are running out of time, so I would like to ask just one final question. How do you think this election will reflect next year's results?
Oh, I don't know how I can predict election results in the future. I'm kind of new down there in Augusta. I'm not much of a politician, but I did find it interesting that, we looked at a recent poll where on both these questions, they seem to be running neck and neck. I found that interesting considering that early polling this year showed that, nationwide and even in Maine, 75% of people supported, some kind of voter ID. And there was a majority even among, the majority party, people on the other side of the aisle with me. And yet as we get closer and as we see money get spent, we see that gap narrowing. So I think it's going to come down to voter turnout. So just like any election, I think it's going to be the same when we come out to the election next year as we decide who's going to be back down in Augusta. It's all going to come down to voter turnout.
All right. Well, Representative, thank you for taking the time for us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.